Hello, I'm Darielle Snipes with the CMSD News Bureau with another edition of Talk to the CEO. Superintendent and CEO Eric Gordon joins me now to talk more about 2020, remote learning, and the timeline for a vaccine. Welcome back, Eric.
Great to see you.
So you just made the decision on what's going to happen in the early parts of 2021. What were the factors on how you made that decision?
Well, as you know, we really want to get to hybrid learning. We're not there yet. We're going to remain in remote for the first 3 weeks of January for the end of our second quarter. There's really three sets of data that we continue to look at. The first is the numbers, the public health data. The spread is wide and getting bigger, and health officials are predicting that's going to be true through January and into February. And so that certainly played a role. Also, we polled our parents again and asked, are you willing to send your children back? Fewer people are willing to return today than they were even in October or in July. And you can't run a system where no one's going to come. And then the third is, how are we able to provide education? And right now, it's imperfect, but we're settled into how to work in this remote environment for most kids. And so for the time being, we're going to stay safe until we can really open up in a hybrid model, hopefully coming into the spring this year.
Right, and let's be clear, you want to see children in the school buildings.
Oh, I can't wait to have our kids back in the school buildings. But we got to do it safely. And I've said this before, but we are 86% people of color in this community, and COVID has not been kind. 4 times the rate of infection as the white community. Our families are those essential workers that are cleaning buildings and working frontline hospitals and working in the food service industries, and we know that they're more at risk. And there are underlying health conditions across our community that means not only are more people getting sick, but they're more sick than the healthier white community. So we've got to be safe. We
do have to be safe. And every time you make an announcement about what's going to happen next, I mean, we do get responses where people are saying, my child is not working in this environment, they need to be back in the buildings. What do you say to those families who really feel that their child needs to be in the building but can't be because of because of COVID?
Well, they do need to be in. They're not wrong. What we have to remember, though, is this is a pandemic. It will end. And my job and our job is not only to see us through it, but to be prepared. What are we going to do when it ends? So for that child who may be off track for graduation or just not able to do the work, how do we think about weekend camps, evening programming, more summer exposure, things that can help make up that lost time? Kids haven't lost the ability to learn. So we have to stay focused on making sure we give back the time they need for their learning, and we will be able to do that.
And parents need to realize too that we are all in this together across the nation. Students are at home, and some learning may have been altered, and children may be having difficulties remote, but colleges know this, and everyone knows this, and they are understanding and giving people grace, would you say?
Well, that's right, and I think our community's actually behaved remarkably well in this environment, but it is important to remember this isn't happening to Cleveland while the rest of the world is merrily on their way. This is a global pandemic. Everybody is struggling through it. It is much longer than any of us thought it was going to be, but now with the hope of vaccine, this may be our last last wave, and we can finally start returning to some normalcy.
And so the talk of vaccines are coming to Ohio soon, and they'll start being distributed. Obviously, there's a tier process. When do you think, or what have you heard, when it might come to essential workers or teachers or even students?
Yeah, we don't yet know where education is in the priority. We know the governor thinks very highly of educators as a top priority. So we are hoping that right behind essential workers and healthcare and the elderly, and particularly those that are living in assisted living, the teachers may be a priority. What we do know so far is that the district and our high school buildings will be vaccination stations. We are partnering with the city health department. Our school nurses are being trained to help provide the vaccines. And in part we're doing that so that we can be part of creating a safe culture, because there's a lot of skepticism about vaccines. Some people are just anti-vax people, and in the black community there's some justified skepticism based on history. And so the more that we, as hopefully trusted people, our school nurses, being there with you to be able to comfort you, will help us to move our community through the next phase, which will get us back to normal over time.
Have you heard anything about a timetable just yet?
No timetable yet, but if any of the kind of larger public health information, we would start seeing vaccinations happening likely in the spring, all the way in through the summer, and that means that we might still be able to move to hybrid, as we come out of the winter, still having to mask, still having to social distance, but with more and more safety around us. And hopefully by next fall, we're looking at a much more normal world.
Hopefully, yes. So with remote learning as it's happening currently, I know that you've always talked about it's always a trial and error, a tweak-in process. So how has it been going in the second quarter?
Well, I've said this before as well. For some kids, it's working really well. For some educators, they're doing a great job. Others are struggling. We just had a lot of questions about, Fs in schools across the country. Our F rate is pretty small, but that's because we made a really deliberate decision to say if a child hasn't finished the work yet, give them an incomplete instead of an F. And, I got some criticism about that. And, but the reality is F says you failed to learn the work and we're moving on. It ends, it closes something. Incomplete says you haven't yet finished the work that you need to finish. And so it sends a different signal. And it's also when we finally can be back in our school buildings, I'm going to actually know where each child stopped because I can see where that incomplete happened. And so I can pick up there and move the child forward instead of just assuming, well, they failed that content and we'll just have to make it up some other time. So it's a really deliberate decision that I think is another reason we're going to be okay in the long run.
But when they do have an incomplete, will they continue to learn that material until it's not an incomplete, so the beginning of second semester? Or how will second semester learning and instruction happen?
Well, again, I think it's going to be very dependent upon where each child is. So there are some children who can keep moving on the pace of the curriculum while they finish up some things. There are other kids who are just really behind because of this experience. And so that's why we think about not only how do we get through this, but what happens next. So who are the children that need some weekend camps to revisit that content? Who are the children that maybe we have for seniors summer evening classes to finish up those grad requirements and get them out on the time, compared to who are children that maybe need a boost year? Maybe we do kindergarten again because you didn't have enough kindergarten, and what's wrong with that? Right? Or how about the freshman that's never stepped foot in their classrooms, in their brand new high school buildings? Maybe they need another freshman year, no foul. So I think it's going to be a bit differentiated depending on what each child's experience was. I think the critical thing is we cannot treat our kids as having deficits. We have to figure out what their unfinished learning is, and we have to start where they are.
So that's very forward thinking, which you're saying some people are stuck on ages. Like, I am 17, I'm 18, I should be graduated from high school. I shouldn't be starting college at 19, even though some people take gap years. But, what do you say to those people who are hard on the numbers or the ages and where children should be?
Well, if I think about high school, the kid that's 17, colleges actually have 6 years to grant a 4-year degree. It's just an assumption. So why do we think that high school should only have 4 years to grant a 4-year degree? If we think of little ones, we actually know from education science that multi-age classrooms are far more effective than classrooms of 5-year-olds for kindergarten. And I've had people say, but there's a stigma. Well, we created the stigma. We're the ones that said that's not okay. So let's say something different. Let's say it is okay to have 5- and 6-year-olds together to learn the content that they're ready for. So again, it's about approach. I think a lot of those kinds of stigmas are driven by deficit thinking. Kids aren't where they're supposed to be, instead of asset thinking. Where are kids and how do we move them forward?
Wonderful. Well, in other news across the district, we received a $1.6 million grant from the Hewlett Foundation to improve student agency. And we also received an earlier grant from the U.S. Department of Education and are expecting another major grant. So kudos to us. So how will these grants complement each other?
Yeah, so all told, we're expecting about $4.5 million in grant money from the Hewlett Foundation, from the U.S. Department of Education, and another foundation that we hope to be able to announce soon. And we want to focus it on 3 things. One is student agency and voice. I really strongly believe in the power and influence of our students, our student advisory, and we want to deepen that in a couple of ways. We want to not only have resources for students to take on projects that they really care about, problems they really want to solve, but also to create their own student-led academic learning pods as part of a recovery solution, and saying, okay, so if you're one of those kids that really thrived and you know that these other reluctant learners learners really struggled. How do you actually run learning pods in your school to help your peers catch up? How do you support that? So really excited about that. We also really want to continue this new relationship between student, parent, and teacher, this new learning relationship. So some of the dollars will be invested in thinking about how to more directly engage with our parents and caregivers, and in more meaningful roles in our schools. You know, at one time we had family liaisons. Why wouldn't a parent be the family liaison? Why would you hire a staff member to do that? So thinking about empowering parents to be their school's liaison for other parents. Thinking about how parents more meaningfully contribute their thinking to the district in our strategy. And then the third is our educators. How do we continue to invest in this shift to a more mastery-oriented, personalized learning that takes advantage of these technologies that we now have, takes advantage of the more self-pacing that we're seeing, and really tools and equips our teachers to thrive in that environment and provide that. The US DOE grant, the Department of Ed grant, then lets us figure out what does it cost, so that we actually fund it the way that it deserves to be funded, much like we're trying to do at the state level right now. And so all of that together is going to really let us to continue to shape as we renew post-pandemic and move forward.
Well, and speaking of state education funding, recently you testified in favor of House Bill 305. So if this passes, what will it accomplish?
So House Bill 305 is Ohio's fair funding bill. It's been worked on for about 3 years now. I've been actively engaged for probably the last couple of years, and working with colleagues across the state. What it does is finally solve the over 2-decade fight about Ohio's constitutionality and its funding. Ohio has multiple times found that the funding formula in Ohio is not equitable and adequate. And so what this does is it costs out what education should cost. It factors in things like poverty, community wealth, all of those sorts of things. And then that is what is funded. It passed the House. I'm not confident we're going to get it through the Senate. If we don't get it through the Senate, we're going to have to come back in the next legislative session. But really, it's important that it pass yet this December in lame duck, because it sets the framework and ends the lawsuit. And then we do, over the next several years, work to fully fund it.
Is there something that we can do right now, maybe write our legislature?
The thing we need to do is reach out to our senators, and particularly in Northeast Ohio, Senator Dolan, who has been a real friend of education. He is the chair of the Finance Committee in the Senate. He will control whether it moves out of the Finance Committee. He's asking smart questions there, and he deserves answers. Those answers are on the funding side, which is what we solve next. The formula itself we need passed so that we guarantee a final solution to an over 2-decade problem.
Yes, we do. So, well, speaking of next school year, I know it seems so far away, but the high school choice portal is open, and the pre-K through 8 portal is going to open up in early 2021. It's kind of hard to think about next school year when we're so knee-deep in this pandemic and remote learning, but what do you want to say to parents and families about making that next choice so that they can continue their learning?
Sure. Well, first I want to say about this school year, because there's a lot of families that are worried that somehow they're going to lose the seat in the school that they selected. And I have said over and over, and I want to say one more time, that's not going to happen. We are not going to have a pandemic take away choices that families were made and were selected for. So just want to assure that again. But for next school year, we do need to think about a return to some normalcy, going back to school. And so we do need our families to select what high schools that their children are most interested in. We're starting earlier this year. We also are doing a lot of virtual open houses, which I'm really excited about. We're doing a more dynamic school choice guide instead of a PDF document or printed booklet. It's a flip book where you can really interact. And our students are actually being ambassadors on these virtual visits. And so it's time to start visiting schools, make those choices in our portal. It's choosecmsd.org.
Wonderful. And so as we close out the year, 2020, what a year, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, you know, out with the old and in with the new. I'm looking forward to 2021, but I don't want us to rush past the importance of the holidays. I hope that our entire community takes the time to enjoy and reflect and celebrate in whatever way that they do, and really, you know, not let the pandemic take away something that is so important, which is this critical time of the year. But I'm ready to ring 2021 in and see a renewal. And I'm excited about what we as a community are going to be able to do as a result of what we've experienced. We have to make something good of this, and 2021 is going to let us.
Yes, well, happy holidays to you and your family.
Happy holidays.